Hi guys, welcome. If you don't know me, I'm Anna Yudin. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology and an author. Today I want to talk about this book that I just recently finished. It's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Dr. Susan Jeffers. Susan Jeffers was a clinical psychologist and also a self-help author, a motivational speaker. I didn't know about her. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2012. But after reading this book, I am a huge fan of hers and you're about to find out why. So a lot of the lessons in this book are lessons that I've kind of already learned in the past few years, and so it really resonated with me. So in this video, I'm not going to give you like a summary of the whole book. I'm just going to give you a few points that I thought were particularly important that I'll be taking moving forward from this. And so if you want a more comprehensive overview of the book, I would actually recommend just buying it. I will make sure to add it to my Amazon storefront and pin that in a comment if you want to check it out from there. But I would kind of summarize the book as the importance of exposure, acceptance, optimism, and responsibility. So let's get into it. Lesson number 1, as you can imagine, is, as the title says, feel the fear and do it anyways. She really cleverly breaks down how basically every level of fear boils down to, I won't be able to handle it if this particular thing happens. And this is something that I feel like I've talked about on this channel before when discussing anxiety. The premise is basically that any sort of anxiety or worry that you have can basically be boiled down to your belief that you're not going to be able to handle it if it happens. You're not going to be able to cope with it. You're not going to be able to survive this. You don't have self-confidence in your own ability to cope with future things that could go wrong. Let's use some examples. Let's say that you're worried about performing in class. You're worried about giving an important presentation in front of your professors and classmates. On the surface level, that might seem like performance anxiety, fear of embarrassing yourself, social anxiety. But when you really break it down, you don't feel like you can handle if something goes wrong, if you actually do embarrass yourself, if you say the wrong thing, if you don't do well on the presentation. You ultimately don't think that you have the capability to move on from that, to learn from it, grow from that experience, and to live, to survive it. And Dr. Jeffers talks about how the only way out of this fear is through it. The only way to deal with fear like this is to feel it and do the thing you're afraid of anyway. And this, in essence, is the definition of exposure therapy. You expose yourself to triggers that make you anxious in incrementally higher levels of anxiety until ultimately you're not as scared of those things anymore. But here's the catch. If you continue to grow as a person, that anxiety is never going to go away. I have sometimes struggled with this when I think about things I've exposed myself to, anxieties that I continue to expose myself to, and it still doesn't go away. This book helps me realize why, because if you continue to grow as a person, the fear is never going to go away. The fear only goes away if you master maybe a lower level anxiety that you have, and then you never try to push yourself outside your comfort zone after that. But she talks about how expanding your comfort zone leads to ultimate power. The only way to feel powerful in life and to be powerful in life is to do things that scare you regularly and to push that little bubble where you feel comfortable further and further out so that you can do more and more things. And she also talked about how everybody feels this way. And sometimes I think it's kind of hard to remember that. It's kind of hard to think that other people are also feeling the fear and doing it anyway. But it's true. It's just that you're not living in their head and maybe they're not telling you about it. So you don't know that everybody else is also feeling fear and doing it anyway. The second lesson that I took away from this book is take responsibility. So the way that Dr. Jeffers defines responsibility, first of all, is not blaming somebody else for your experiences. A way that this looks is not blaming other people for your inner experiences, your thoughts, your feelings, and also your outer circumstances. Unfortunately, I do know adult children of, let's say, toxic parents that to this day still kind of blame their parents for their own failure to launch. And while I think there's certainly a time and place for accountability and sharing the way that parents have harmed you, I don't necessarily think it's healthy to constantly blame somebody else for your own failures, essentially. Taking responsibility is also not about blaming yourself. If you haven't heard of the false responsibility fallacy, what it says is that taking responsibility is not the same as blaming somebody. And so per this way of thinking about it, take responsibility for yourself, but don't blame anyone, including yourself. There's no need to blame yourself if something goes wrong. Take responsibility and thinking, okay, what can I learn from this? What could I do better next time? But ultimately understand that shit happens. And she also defines taking responsibility as being aware of payoffs that might be keeping you stuck, secondary gains that you have. So let me give you an example of this. In the past, up until very recently, I have struggled with a considerable amount of anxiety. And at one point, I had been trying for so long to figure it out. And I was like, what is this about? Like, is it possible that I'm getting some sort of payoff from this anxiety? Is it possible that I'm getting maybe some sort of attention from the people in my life that is keeping me stuck in this loop of anxiety, that I'm not motivated to get out of it? And I realized something at that point. I realized that there was a certain person in my life who I felt was projecting a lot of anxiety onto me. And when I was the one who was freaking out and anxious, that was the only time that this person in my life was not the anxious one, that this person would suddenly slip into a very comforting, reassuring role. So I was getting a payoff. I was getting a reprieve from this person projecting their anxiety onto me by me being anxious. And once I realized that, I had to change some things around. I had to realize, okay, when you're feeling anxious, you can't tell this particular person because you're clearly getting a payoff from it. Taking responsibility also means figuring out what you want and acting on it. And if you struggle with figuring out what you want or decision-making, indecisiveness, we're going to talk about it in a moment. That also means acknowledging all the choices that you have in a situation. I told this story on TikTok, but a few months ago I was complaining to my cousin about the cost of rent where I live and how expensive it is and how it makes it just so hard to live in this place. And I was complaining and he listened, and then once I was done talking, he said, "But you're choosing to live there. You are making the decision to pay for this rent. If you wanted something cheaper, you could find it, but you're making a decision." And that was so true. It was like a mic drop moment in which I realized, yeah, you know what? I'm not as powerless as I'm making myself out to be. I'm choosing to live in this place with expensive rent because I want 2 bedrooms, because I want a fireplace, because I want a certain number of square feet. I'm not a victim in this circumstance. It's a choice I'm making. Choices have consequences. Similarly, I think my therapist has done a really good job of, when I'm seeming powerless in a situation, really highlighting, no, like, hold on, like, you do have a choice in this though. Like, is this what you want to do, or do you not want to do this? I don't want to get too specific into like what exactly we were talking about, but there were a couple of situations I can think of where I was telling her like, well, I guess this is the way it is. This thing came up and there's nothing I can do about it. And she made a point of making me realize that actually you do have power in the situation. Actually, you could choose to do this if this is what you wanted, but is that what you want? And when she highlighted this in a very compassionate way, I suddenly realized, you know what, that's actually not what I want. And I'm kind of just playing into this idea that like I'm powerless in this situation because I don't want to take responsibility for the fact that I don't want to do this at the end of the day. And the part about taking responsibility that really resonated with me from this book was the power of how we speak. The power of the words that we choose. So for instance, she recommends switching I can't to I can, but I choose blank. So again, going by that same example, I can't afford rent in Seattle versus I can find cheaper rent in Seattle, but I choose this one. And replacing I should with I could. I should go to dental school. Sounds a lot more disempowering. Sounds a lot more like somebody external is imposing all these rules on you versus I could go to dental school, or I could take this job that means a lot to me. Switching it's a problem to it's an opportunity, right? Like, oh, it's a problem that, this stressor has popped up in my life versus it's an opportunity to learn in this way, grow in this way, cope in this way, whatever it is. Also switching I hope with I know. For example, God, I hope I get this raise versus I know I will get this raise. Also switching if only to next time. Oh, if only I had known that I was supposed to do this on the presentation. No, scratch that, replace it with next time I will know to do this on the presentation. There's no way. Instead of that, say, let's see what happens. There's no way that I'm going to make it to this on time versus let's see what happens. I'll give it a try. And lastly, replacing what will I do with I know I can handle it. Remember, at the crux of anxiety is your feeling that you cannot handle whatever that thing is that you fear. So instead of saying, oh my God, I won't be able to handle this, what am I going to do? No, remind yourself, whatever happens, however terrible it is, you will be able to handle it. I mean, think about it. Even the worst case scenario, even illness and death, people handle it. You can too. Everybody's going to die at one point. We're all going to have to realize that we can handle it. Lesson number 3 that I learned from this book is to find the silver lining in everything. You may have noticed that this is kind of like a common theme that runs through the personal growth journal, but there is research to suggest that people who find the silver lining, even in stressful, traumatic things, bounce back easier, have better outcomes, even down to their life expectancy. But the way that Dr. Jeffers put it that really resonated with me was, imagine that you have a choice point. Path A is right and path B is right. There's no right or wrong situation here. Both are opportunities to grow. And you can practice this in day-to-day life with, little things. Just thinking about, well, I could choose A or I could choose B. It doesn't really matter. Maybe one will be more advantageous than the other, but at the end of the day, even if I choose the less advantageous one, I'm still going to learn from it. I'm still going to experience a silver lining that will help me moving forward. So for example, even with tiny things like deciding which hike to go on, it might seem like this huge monumental decision of, if I don't pick the right one, then I'm not going to have such a good time. What about instead of that, you were to just say, I could choose this hike that has, higher intensity but a nicer view, or I could choose this hike that could be a little too easy for me but doesn't have as nice of a view. They're both correct. There's no right or wrong answer here. I don't need to hyperfixate on this and try so hard to find the best decision possible. Just pick one. At the end of the day, you're still going to experience something that's valuable. Find the value in everything. This can really help you with indecisiveness in the context of what to wear, what to do with your life. And I feel like it can really help you just release control over whatever happens in life, because you're recognizing that even if stuff happens that's less than ideal, it still would have been a valuable lesson. It still would have been an interesting journey to go on. But here's an important part. Do correct your path if you don't like where you're going. There is such a thing as the sunk cost fallacy, where you feel like you've invested so much down a certain path that you don't want to suddenly shift gear. And there is no benefit to that. If you understand deeply, this is not the right path for me, I don't like where I'm going, you need to shift where you're going, or you're going to end up where you don't like it. And the last lesson, arguably the most helpful of everything in this book, is say yes to the universe. I really feel like this is just another way of saying practice acceptance. If you've seen any of my other videos on acceptance, you know what I mean. Acceptance means releasing control over what happens to you, not resisting reality, even when it contradicts your life plans or your preferences. So even if, let's say, your school shuts down while you're right about to graduate, huge disruption of your life plans, right? Say yes to it. Say, this is what's happening. We're just going to go with it. We're just going to flow with it. I'm not going to take myself so seriously. I'm just going to see what happens. Or even little things like you're running late and you're really upset about the traffic. Just say yes to what's happening. Just understand that when you put up resistance to what's happening, you're resisting everything. You're resisting everything in life. You're resisting the entire universe, everything that is happening all at once, because everything's interconnected. That's too much for you. It's too much effort. It's going to exhaust you to constantly put up resistance to reality. Just say yes. Just go with whatever the universe throws at you. Saying no turns you into a victim, takes away your power, it impedes your growth, and like I said, it's just exhausting. She actually recommended physically nodding your head and saying yes when you're experiencing resistance to something. And I tried it and I was like, you know what, it actually works. So I would recommend you try it right now. Just nod your head and notice how you can physically feel yourself being more agreeable with whatever circumstance you're in. And she really recommends just trusting the universe, because there are two possible outcomes. One outcome is that you go exactly down the path that you're meant to be towards your higher self, or you learn a lesson. And that's actually why I have a lessons section in A Season of Life, is because I want people every single day when they're journaling to reflect on what they took from yesterday. It helps us make meaning, it helps us learn, it helps us make the following day easier for us. So in summary, the lessons that I took away from this book are feel the fear and do it anyway, take responsibility, find the silver lining in everything, and say yes to the universe. Like I said, I really recommend this book. If you want to check it out, I'll put it in a pinned comment, and I'll see you soon.